Welcome to the Synapse and the Stoa. I'm your host, John Sampson. On this show, we explore the intersection of ancient wisdom and modern science to find practical, hard-hitting solutions to the challenges of being human in the 21st century. Today, we're diving into a topic that hits home for almost everyone listening, even if we don't always talk about it in the locker room, the office, or at the bar. We're talking about loneliness. Now, if you're sitting there feeling a bit of a hollow ache in your chest, or if you're surrounded by people but still feel like you're on the outside looking in, first, I want you to know something vital. You are not the first person to feel this way, not by a long shot. Every person listening to my voice has struggled with this. Every philosopher we study and every scientist who maps the brain has felt that same pull. But here's the good news. You have the power to change those feelings. Loneliness isn't a life sentence, it's a signal. And once we understand the why behind that signal, using the tools of neuroscience and the frameworks of the Stoics, we can start building what Marcus Aurelius called the inner citadel. Today, we're going to learn the difference between being lonely and just being alone. We're going to look at why your brain treats social rejection like physical hunger. And finally, I'm going to give you a toolkit of practical steps to shift your perspective on solitude so you can stop fearing the silence and start using it as a source of strength. Before we get into it, I have one small favor to ask. Hit that subscribe or follow button. It's free and it helps us reach more people who can benefit from this show. All right, let's dive in. Let's start with the synapse part of our show. Why does loneliness feel so physically painful? And why does it feel like a heavy weight or a cold draft in the room? For a long time, we viewed loneliness as just a mood, something fleeting, like being bummed out that your team lost. But modern neuroscience has flipped that on its head. We now know that loneliness is actually an important biological distress signal. It is as critical to your survival as hunger or thirst. Think about it from an evolutionary perspective. Our ancestors didn't survive because they were the biggest or strongest. They survived because they were the best at working together. In the ancient social perimeter, drifting away from the tribe meant you were more likely to be picked off by a predator or starve. So your brain developed a social homeostatic system, much like the system that tells you when your body temperature is too low. When those social bonds start to fray, your brain triggers a cascade of neural and hormonal shifts. It's a survival mechanism designed to motivate you to repair those bonds. But here's the problem for us in the modern world. When that signal becomes chronic, when you feel lonely for months or years, it actually starts to rewrite your brain. It increases your amygdala reactivity, making you hyper-vigilant to social threats. You start seeing rejection where it doesn't exist. And it can even lead to damage in the protective sheath around nerve fibers in the brain that allows signals to travel quickly and efficiently, which increases your risks for things like dementia and heart disease. But, and this is the key, loneliness is subjective. This is the distinction we need to burn into our minds. There is a massive difference between social isolation and loneliness. Social isolation is an objective count. How many people did you talk to today? How big is your social circle? Loneliness is the perceived discrepancy between the relationships that you have and the ones you want. You can be objectively isolated, living in a cabin in the woods, and not feel a lick of loneliness. That's called solitude. On the other hand, you can be in the middle of a packed stadium or a busy office and feel profoundly, heartbreakingly lonely. The goal of this episode isn't necessarily to make you the most popular guy in the room. It's to help you master the subjective side of the equation. Because if loneliness is a perception, you have the power to change that perception. To understand why we feel this insufficiency when we're disconnected, it helps to look back to the foundations of Western thought in Athens. Aristotle famously said that man is by nature a political animal. Now, he didn't mean we all love talking about taxes and voting. He meant that we are beings meant to live in a polis, a community. Aristotle argued that an individual is not an autonomous unit that just happens to join a society for convenience. Instead, he said, the community is prior to the individual, just like a whole body is prior to a hand. If you cut a hand off a body, it's not really a hand anymore because it can't do what a hand is supposed to do. When we are lonely, Aristotle would say we are experiencing an ontological crisis. We feel like that severed hand, disconnected from the source of our purpose and virtue. He had a very stark way of putting it. Anyone who can live without society is either a beast or a god. If you're a beast, you're driven only by instinct and appetite, lacking the reason that makes us human. If you're a god, you're perfectly self-sufficient and don't need anyone. But for the rest of us, the humans in the middle, we exist in a state of necessary interdependence. Even Plato in the Symposium described loneliness as a kind of metaphysical wound. He used a myth about humans originally having 4 arms and 4 legs before being split in half by the gods. Ever since, we've been searching for our other half to feel whole again. Now, why am I telling you this? Because it validates what you're feeling. If you feel like something is missing when you're lonely, that's not a weakness. It's a fundamental part of the human condition that the greatest minds in history have recognized for 2,500 years. You aren't broken. You're just experiencing the reality of being a relationship-seeking animal. One of the most brilliant political theorists of the 20th century, Hannah Arendt, knew loneliness intimately. She was a stateless refugee fleeing Nazi Germany. Arendt gave us a critical framework that I want you to think about. She distinguished between 3 states: isolation, loneliness, and solitude. Isolation is when you're cut off from the ability to act with others. It's a political state where you feel powerless because you can't act in concert with your peers. Loneliness is the existential abyss. It's when you lose connection not just to others, but to the world and even to yourself. It's a state of uprootedness where you feel like you don't matter to anyone or anything. Solitude, however, is something entirely different. Arendt called solitude the state where I am by myself, but I am 2 in 1. What does 2 in 1 mean? It means that in solitude, you're never truly alone because you're engaged in a dialogue with yourself. You're thinking, you're questioning. You are your own companion. Loneliness only happens when that internal dialogue breaks down, when you can no longer stand your own company and you feel abandoned by yourself. This is where the shift happens. And it's not just an individual problem. It can become societal. Totalitarian regimes, Arendt noted, thrive on making people lonely because lonely people lose the ability to think critically and act together. When we strengthen our own minds and reclaim our solitude, we aren't just feeling better. We are reclaiming our humanity and our freedom. This brings us to the Stoa. If loneliness, as Hannah Arendt suggested, is the breakdown of our relationship with ourselves, then the Stoics are the master architects of the rebuild. When we talk about Stoicism today, People often think of a stiff upper lip or suppressing emotions, but for the ancient Stoics, it was about clarity. It was about looking at a challenge, like the hollow ache of loneliness, and stripping away the stories we tell ourselves about it until only the truth remains. Let's look at 3 specific titans of Stoic thought: a slave, an emperor, and a statesman. First, we have Epictetus. This is a man who was born into slavery. He was physically disabled, likely having his leg broken by a master, and lived much of his life with absolutely no social status. He was a man who was unprovided for by the world. In his discourses, Epictetus makes a distinction that is vital for us to understand. He says, one who is alone is not necessarily solitary, any more than one in a crowd is necessarily not solitary. He's telling us that being solitary, meaning lonely, is a state of mind, not a physical condition. Epictetus points to the god Zeus as the ultimate example. When the world ends in a great fire, Zeus is left entirely alone. Does he despair? Does he feel unloved? No. Zeus is content because he is at peace with himself. He dwells with himself and is occupied with his own thoughts. Epictetus challenges us to do the same. He tells us that if we feel lonely, it's because we have forgotten how to be our own companion. We have become unprovided because we've outsourced our happiness to the presence of other people. His tool for you is the dichotomy of control. You cannot control if people call you. You cannot control if your partner leaves. You cannot control if your social circle shrinks. When you try to control those things, you feel helpless and exposed, the hallmarks of loneliness. But you can control your inner dialogue. You have the power to change those feelings by shifting your focus from why am I alone to how can I use this time to improve my own mind. Now let's talk about the man at the other end of the social spectrum, Marcus Aurelius, the emperor of Rome. On the surface, Marcus was never alone. He was surrounded by advisors, soldiers, and subjects 24/7. But his journals, the meditations, reveal a man who felt deeply isolated by his responsibilities. He lived in a world of betrayal, plague, and constant war. He understood that you can be the most powerful man on earth and still feel like an outsider. Marcus developed the concept of the inner citadel. He wrote, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." Think of your mind as a fortress. The world outside can be chaotic. People can be cruel or absent. But inside the citadel, you are the commander. Marcus argued that we don't need to go to the mountains or the seashore to find peace. We can retire within ourselves at any moment. For the modern man, this is a game changer. When you're sitting in your apartment on a Friday night and the silence feels heavy, remember that you aren't stuck there. You are in your citadel. You have the ability to observe your thoughts, to read, to learn, and to find a quiet and untroubled space that no one can take away from you. The pain of loneliness is often just the noise of the world outside the walls. When you retreat into your soul, that noise fades. And finally, we have Seneca. Seneca was a wealthy statesman and a man of the world. Seneca loved friendship. He wrote extensively about how a life without friends is like a desert. But Seneca offered a brilliant paradox. To be a great friend, you must first be capable of being alone. He argued that most people seek out friends because they are running away from themselves. They use other people as a distraction from their own boredom or self-loathing. Seneca called this hunger. When you are lonely and desperate for connection, you aren't looking for a friend. You're looking for a supplier to fill a hole in your soul. His advice? Withdraw into yourself as far as you can. Associate with those who will make you a better man. Welcome those whom you yourself can improve. He believed that the purpose of friendship is to share virtue, not to fix loneliness. By building your own self-sufficiency, you can stop being a beggar for social attention. You become a contributor. You find that once you're content with your own company, you actually attract better, deeper relationships because you aren't coming from a place of neediness. You're coming from a place of strength. So what does this look like in practice? It's what I call the Stoic shield. It's built on 3 realizations that I want you to carry with you. 1, you are not the first person to experience this. Even an emperor and a slave felt the exact same unprovided feeling you do. You're part of a 2,500-year-old tradition of men learning to master this. 2, loneliness is a view, not a fact. As Epictetus famously said, men are disturbed not by things, but by the views which they take of them. If you view your solitude as freedom rather than abandonment, the feeling itself changes. And 3, you are your own primary companion. If you are bored or miserable when you are alone, why would you expect anyone else to enjoy your company? Use solitude to become the kind of person you would actually want to hang out with. You have the power to change your feelings of loneliness. It starts by stopping the external search and beginning the internal build. It starts by realizing that you are never truly alone if you have a well-ordered mind. Now, I know what some of you could be thinking. That sounds great, but I'm still stuck in my head. And my head is a dark place right now. I hear you. And this is where modern psychology provides the tactical how-to. Loneliness often creates what psychologists call maladaptive thought patterns. Because your brain is in that survival mode we talked about earlier, you start to develop cognitive biases. You might assume people don't want to talk to you. Or you might interpret a short text message as a sign that someone is mad at you. These thoughts create a self-perpetuating cycle. You feel lonely, so you withdraw. Because you withdraw, you feel more lonely. And because you're more lonely, your brain becomes even more sensitive to perceived social threats. The most effective way to break this is through cognitive behavioral therapy and acceptance and commitment therapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy helps you identify those biased thoughts and challenge them. Instead of, nobody likes me, you test the evidence. You ask, is that actually true? Or is my lonely brain just trying to protect me from a predator that isn't there? Acceptance and commitment therapy focuses on accepting the feeling of loneliness without letting it dictate your actions. You can feel lonely and still go to the gym, still call a friend, or still work on your craft. Psychological research also points to social prescribing, getting involved in group-based interventions or community activities. It's not just about meeting people, it's about participating in a shared polis, just as Aristotle suggested. But remember what we said earlier. The goal is to improve the quality and meaningfulness of connections, not just the quantity. One deep, meaningful friendship is worth more than 1,000 followers on social media when it comes to quieting that biological alarm. We've covered the neuroscience, the philosophy, and the psychology. Now, I want to give you some specific, practical steps you can start using today to help you tolerate being alone and shift your perspective into productive solitude. 1, practice the 2-in-1 dialogue. Inspired by Hannah Arendt and Epictetus, Start a daily journaling practice, but don't just record what happened. Engage in a dialogue. Ask yourself, why did that bother me today? And then answer yourself as if you were speaking to a trusted friend. This strengthens your internal companionship and turns empty time into thinking time. 2, reframe the signal. When you feel that pang of loneliness, don't judge yourself for it. Recognize it for what it is, a biological hunger signal for social connection. Say to yourself, my brain is doing its job. It's telling me my social bonds need attention. By labeling it, you take away its power to make you feel broken. 3, build your inner citadel. Set aside 15 minutes a day for intentional solitude. No phone, no podcast, except this one, obviously. No distractions. Sit with your thoughts. Marcus Aurelius reminds us that we can retreat into our own souls whenever we choose. Learn to find the quiet and untroubled space within yourself. 4, challenge the lonely brain biases. If you find yourself thinking, they didn't invite me because they don't like me, stop. That's your amygdala talking. Use cognitive behavioral therapy techniques to find 3 other possible reasons for the event. Maybe they were busy. Maybe they forgot. Maybe they thought you were too busy. Don't let your brain's survival mechanism dictate your reality. 5, small acts of social restitution. This is the act of repairing frayed bonds. You don't need to throw a party. Send one text to someone you haven't spoken to in a while. Ask a genuine question. Small, meaningful interactions are the nutrients that satisfy the biological hunger of loneliness. And 6, focus on the eudaimonia, not just happiness. Remember, Aristotle's eudaimonia is flourishing. Find a purpose that is bigger than yourself. When you're working toward a goal or contributing to a community, the insufficiency of loneliness often fades because you're reconnecting the hand to the body of the world. As we wrap up this episode of the Synapse and the Stoa, I want to leave you with a final thought from Marcus Aurelius. At any moment you choose, you can retire within yourself. Loneliness is a universal human experience. It is a biological alarm and a philosophical challenge, but it is not a permanent state unless we allow our minds to stay trapped in those maladaptive cycles. You are not the first person to feel this, and you will not be the last, but you are the only one who can build your inner citadel. You have the power to change your perspective, to distinguish between being lonely and being alone, and to turn your isolation into a powerful, productive solitude. If you found this episode helpful, please share it with one person, just one, who might need to hear it today. That's a small act of acting in concert, as Arend would say, and it's the first step toward building a more connected world. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please take a minute to give us a 5-star review. That helps the algorithm let us reach more people. Be sure to check out our show notes for this and all of our episodes at synapseandstoa.com. And if you're interested in early access to new episodes, ad-free episodes, suggesting ideas you'd like me to explore in future episodes, or connecting with me directly, join us on Patreon. Until next time, thank you for listening.